Alright, I got my Viking garb on today because the Vikings are playing the Jets tonight for Monday Night Football. So I thought that before the game comes on, I would actually touch on something that I've kind of left out of the DVD at this point, at least haven't elaborated on too much. I wanted to get into a little bit. And that's cruise weeks, or cruising, as most people who know anything about DC training, that term they're probably pretty familiar with. It can be called deload week, active rest. I prefer to use the term cruise because so many people are familiar with that term that we all know what we're talking about when we say cruise or cruise week. So I'm going to refer to it as that too, at the risk of sounding like I'm stealing terminology from DC training. I'm pretty sure he'll give me the okay and he'll understand. So I'm going to talk about the cruise weeks in reference to what I do, what I've come up with my training. And there's primarily two ways to go about cruising, or two ways that I cruise. One is proactive and the other is reactive. Now, proactive is certainly the better choice, but it doesn't always work out that way. So proactive just basically means that you schedule a week that is either lighter training, taking it easy on your body, or no training at all, quite frankly. It just depends on what I need at that time. Now, myself, I prefer to only go 5 weeks at 100%, and then I like to take that 6th week and cruise. A lot of times that means just training light, taking it easy. What I refer to a lot as fluff. The wind's kicking up a little bit out here. Colorado wind, it's getting a little breezy. I call it fluff because essentially they're the exercises like pec deck squeezes, press downs, leg extensions, things like that. A lot of machine isolation work that primarily just gives you a pump. Isn't going to do a whole lot to stress your joints. You're not going to be doing a lot of compound movements, things of that nature. So stretch and squeeze type exercises, fluff, whatever you want to call it. Now, what to do during that week specifically will depend on how beat up I am. Now, ideally, like I said, I would like to train light. I still like to get into the gym. It keeps me in my routine. It keeps things consistent. And I'm old school. I don't like to not train. So to go into the gym and train light is hard enough, but to not train at all for that week, to rest and recover, is difficult to do. So when I go in, I go light. My body isn't too beat up. I don't have aches and pains, and I'm taking my cruise weeks proactively. Essentially, I come off those 5 weeks, I'm still pretty strong. My brain says, hey, you just need to keep going. You're strong. You're probably going to put up PRs next week. But that's the time when it's best to back off, take that cruise week to make sure that you're recovered, and then come back that following week even stronger. Now, the other option is taking your cruise weeks reactively. And reactively is pretty simple. That just means you essentially just train week after week until you're just beat to shit. And then, of course, when you are, you start to get things that hurt, whether it be knees or elbows, or you might have a ping, your chest, a little bit of a strain. When you go to warm up on inclines, you can kind of feel a little bit. You're kind of flirting with it a little bit. Probably not a good idea, but you know, we don't always make the best decisions either when it comes to training. Reactive cruises aren't a very good idea for a couple reasons. Number one, it's best when you're taking cruises reactively to not train at all, because a lot of the wear and tear on your joints and tendons and things of that nature you'll actually benefit more from not training and give your body that complete rest than you will to even come in and continue to train light. I know myself, my shoulders are a prime indicator of whether I need to cruise or not, whether I've gone too long, that sort of thing. They'll just ache like hell. They'll ache like hell when I'm doing inclines. They'll ache like hell when I'm doing overhead shoulder presses. And it might only be in the 3rd or 4th week. So you got to pay attention to what your joints feel like. And this is the age issue. This is the longevity issue. And that is, you know what, I used to be able to train week in, week out. Really didn't notice that much in the way of aches and pains and that sort of thing. But after 27 years of training, those things catch up with you. And the premise of this entire DVD is so that you train smart first and hard second. Everybody can train hard, but you can only train hard for so long, and then you better be training smart or your ass ain't going to go much further. So we're in it for the long haul. I'm in it for the long haul. You're in it for the long haul if you're watching this DVD. You're trying to get pointers that will help you to train for year after year, maybe decade after decade. So I'm giving you my experience as far as the cruising is concerned here. So again, coming back to the proactive approach, I think it's best if you can schedule more frequent cruise weeks. This allows your body to not get beat up, but it's the whole premise of 2 steps forward, 1 step back, that sort of thing, to make sure that you're not overtrained, that your joints are in good shape, and you're able to come in and pound it at 110% when you're in there to train hard on the weeks that you're blasting. And I say the term blasting, again, being a DC training term that most of us are familiar with. So I use that term for familiarity again. The reactive approach, just not a terribly good idea because you're going to be essentially pushing the envelope as far as overtraining. And again, you're going to put your joints and your tendons, things of that nature, in a pretty vulnerable spot where aches and pains just aren't something that you want to deal with deep into a blast when you're trying to train your ass off and push the envelope a little bit, so to speak. So as far as nutrition goes, I get a lot of questions about, hey, I'm cruising, should I cut back on my calories, should I cut back on my carbs, should I increase my cardio? In my situation, I prefer not to cut calories, I prefer not to cut carbs, primarily because I see the cruise week as a week to benefit from recovery and rest, and I feel like if I cut my calories and cut my carbs, that I potentially am cutting into that recovery. It's a time for my body to catch up, and if I'm going to cut the amount of nutrients that I'm providing to my body during that week, it stands to reason that I might be suffering from a recovery standpoint as well. Another question that I get a lot is, I'm in a contest prep. Do I cruise in a contest prep? And the answer is absolutely. In fact, you're likely to be overtrained or potentially overtrained, have joint issues, joint pain, strains, that sort of thing during a contest prep than you are in the off season, quite frankly. When you're running on a restricted caloric intake and you're doing added cardio and the stresses of everything that goes with a prep, you're really putting demands on your system. It's making it difficult for your system to keep up. My best advice, again, and I do this myself, is even if I'm in a prep, it might be 6 weeks out, and if it's time for me to take a cruise week because my body's beat up and that's when it's scheduled, that's what I'm going to do. My last prep, I made sure that I took a cruise week, and I still train light, but I took a cruise week at the 11th week, and I took a cruise week at the 6th week. And I think without it, I would have just driven myself into the ground. After 4 or 5 weeks of training real hard, it's all my knees can do to keep up. I get into that 5th week, and it gets pretty tough. You wrap the wraps a little tighter, and sometimes I got to lighten up on the weight. It is what it is. You got to make those changes. You got to make those adjustments to make sure, again, training smart before you train hard, to make sure. Look, if you come out with an injury, you can't train for 4 or 5 weeks, can't train for 3 or 4 months, have to skip a show. What good is that in the big picture when all you really had to do was back off for 1 session instead of pushing, be it your knees, a shoulder, an elbow, something to that effect. So hopefully I've given you some information here, some insight into how I cruise, my thoughts behind what I do with cruising proactively. I'd encourage you to also choose the proactive approach as far as your cruising, in reference to it being such a better idea than to take it reactively. And I think that your progress will show. I know mine has, and you don't run the risk of overtraining.